computer. All right, we are starting. So thank you very much for joining us today, everyone. My name is Clyde Cleveland, and I'm the host of Common Sense Summit. And common sense, we use common sense and our logic and our good judgment and our hearts and our minds to solve the problems and the challenges of the day. So today we have possibly the mother of all problems that we're going to be talking about today. And I think probably one of the very best people in the entire world to talk about that problem. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about protecting the earth from genetically modified organisms and also saving the gene pool from what's a new threat, a relatively new threat called gene editing. So our speaker is Jeffrey Smith. Jeffrey has been in this for over 25 years. He wrote one of the very first books on genetically modified organisms called Seeds of Deception. He also wrote Genetic Roulette. He also recently made a film called Secret Ingredients with Amy Hart. So he's been at this for a very long time. He started the Institute for Responsible Technologies, and that was about 25 years ago as well. He has been to over 45 countries around the world. And I know a lot of this because I am on the board of the Institute for Responsible Technologies and have been for almost the entire 25 years, I believe. And when he's gone around the world, it's been at the behest of governments in many cases, different organizations, but a lot of governments from around the world have asked specifically for Jeffrey Smith to come and talk to their cabinet members and congressmen and leaders in that country. So we have somebody that really knows a lot about this topic. I would start this by asking Jeffrey to tell us a little bit about how you got involved, Jeffrey, in this whole movement and this cause.
Well, thank you, Clyde, and thank you for that nice introduction. About 25 years ago, I went to a lecture by a genetic engineer whistleblower.
Mhm.
He was aware and informed the audience for me for the first time that genetic engineering existed, but moreover, that companies like Monsanto were about to deploy the technology into the food supply and into the environment. And these are two very different sets of risks. But what the scientist said, and he was an award-winning grant receiving scientist from the NIH and all, and he was doing genetic engineering. And he said, as a scientist, I know that there are so many unpredicted outcomes from the process that it is not possible to guarantee safety either to health or the environment. In fact, you can predict the fact that there's unpredictable outcomes. It is so consistent. But here's what he talked about. From the health standpoint, they were about to grow and introduce into the food supply genetically engineered Roundup Ready soybeans and corn. These are crops that are engineered not to die when sprayed with Roundup herbicide created by Monsanto. Monsanto sold Roundup herbicide. It was the number one best-selling herbicide in the world, and it was going off patent in the year 2000. So they created genetically engineered crops on the basis of creating Roundup Ready GMOs, so that when they sold the Roundup Ready seeds, the farmers signed a contract that they would only use Monsanto's version of glyphosate, which is the chief poison in Roundup. So it was a way of extending their dominance in the sales of Roundup. So they created the seeds that would survive the Roundup, making the weeding easier.
Right.
Now, what was going to happen then is humans around the world were going to eat soybeans grown in Iowa, where I was living, and also around the Midwest, that were one, genetically engineered so they could create unpredicted side effects, toxins, allergens, anti-nutrients, and two, sprayed with Roundup, which was going to go into the crops, you couldn't wash it off, and then into our bodies. Now, this was alarming from a health standpoint because no one was requiring any safety studies. No one was monitoring the outcomes of eating genetically modified crops. And as he said, there was no way that Monsanto or any company could guarantee the safety because the process itself is inherently unsafe. But what was even of greater concern, Clyde, was the impact of releasing these into the environment. So
Mhm.
it would affect everyone who eats, but it would also permanently change the gene pool because it would introduce a new genome that was created in a laboratory into crops that could then crossbreed with non-GMO relatives, creating new genetically engineered offspring, which would create genetically engineered offspring, which would create genetically engineered offspring. And so all future generations, for as long as that species existed, would have at least some percentage of this trait. Now, for some of the crops that were engineered, like canola, it's related to the brassicas. So it could cross with chard and it can cross with other products that we eat. And
Right.
so, and then it also can cross with weeds. And so that the nature herself would become a reservoir of these corrupted gene pools, which would be irreversibly contaminating nature's gene pool. So I got active in 25 years ago, focusing primarily on the health dangers because that was the trigger for people to be more active. They didn't want to die of a disease or exacerbated disease linked to GMOs and Roundup. And I had the goods on it saying, yeah, there's possibilities. And then as the years went on, we had more and more evidence. And now half of the world appropriately believes that GMO foods are unsafe. So we did a good job. But more recently, as we'll talk about, I've pivoted my focus to the second concern.
The gene editing. So let's go back for just a second. So as you said, any expert in this field knows that the implications of this are unpredictable, correct? So
Yes.
they know that. And so if you go and research, and I have arguments with people on this all the time, and they go online and they say, oh, well, they've done all these studies. They claim they've done all these studies, and they've studied it thoroughly, and they know that there's no possibility of damage or corruption at all. So how do you answer that?
I remember I was in South Africa talking to a plant breeder who had
Mhm.
worked with Monsanto to create a genetically engineered, I think it was Roundup ready sugarcane. And the breeder normally starts with about 350,000 plants and after 15 years gets one variety that he introduces. And so what he was doing with Monsanto is he was genetically engineering in the gene from bacteria to create a new variety,
Mhm.
perhaps one of his popular varieties, but now introducing this GMO. And so I said to him, kind of tricked him. We were friends and it wasn't really a
Mhm.
problem. I said, so you do the plant breeding and you let them do the safety studies. He goes, that's right. So I said, so you spend the time narrowing down the best variety and then they do the intergenerational animal feeding studies, the human clinical trials, the complete analysis of the genome, RNA, et cetera. He goes, that's right. And I said, they don't actually do that. They don't do intergenerational animal feeding studies. They don't do long-term animal feeding studies. And the animal feeding studies they do are so superficial, they're designed to avoid finding problems, and there's no human clinical trials. He had no idea. He's working with Monsanto. He's creating a variety to introduce into the human food supply and has no idea that his partner Monsanto is
Doesn't.
so inept and so it basically abdicated all responsibility. Now, that's someone working with Monsanto. Imagine the people who are not working, who just assume that no one in their right mind is going to introduce the products of genetic engineering without at least figuring out the changes in that organism compared to its original. And you realize that they have meticulously avoided doing the real research. And
Mhm.
we have caught them red handed using the wrong detection technologies, the wrong control groups, the wrong statistics. When they do find even dead animals in their animal feeding studies, they create non-scientific excuses to pretend that it wasn't related to their product. They substitute new animals halfway through. They actually have used laboratories that were guilty of fraud, where the executives, including a Monsanto executive, went to jail for fraud. You realize, I mean, the most the most glaring example recently, and this is not just the most glaring example, just the most recent one, was when Monsanto was testing Roundup. They had to test it against absorption into human skin. So they took a human cadaver, put it in the skin, and found 10% was absorbed into the skin, which is more than 3 times the legal amount. So they never told the EPA the absorption rate. Instead, they did a typical Monsanto study where they took human skin and baked it in an oven. You know what happens to meat when it gets baked in an oven.
Right.
But that wasn't good enough. It still wasn't good enough. So then they froze the baked skin. They froze it. It
And
became fully leather-like, added the Roundup, and only a little bit got in. So that's what they reported to the EPA as the normal absorbable rate by human skin. A total lie, complete fraud. So it's true. So if you want to know an answer to the question, you just have to have 1 or 2 examples of what Monsanto has done. And of course, I'm going to preempt your other question about they're going to say the government has done safety testing and all that.
Yep.
Well, actually, the FDA scientists were very concerned about GMOs and confirmed, based on their understanding, that it could create allergens and
Right.
toxins and anti-nutrients. But the person in charge of policy at the FDA was a political appointee, Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president, and later still FDA's food czar under Obama. And
Right.
he said, the agency's not aware of any information showing that the foods created by these new methods differ from other foods in any meaningful or uniform way, unquote. That was a lie,
Right.
because we have documents on our website at responsibletechnology.org showing the exact opposite, that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA was exactly the opposite.
And that resulted from the lawsuit that Steve Drucker had
Correct. Who's
against
a friend of ours, yes, mutual friend.
So he got all that information from all what the doctors actually said, and their consensus opinion was that there was a danger to these foods, and they should have long-term testing, but they ignored that.
Right.
So, and the lawsuit went nowhere because of statute of limitations or some other ridiculous.
It was, well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he should have won, but that's, it's one
Right.
reason why I didn't decide to get into activism through the courts, because you can spend years and tons of money and lose with no incremental gain.
Right.
Our focus was on educating people about the dangers linking GMOs and Roundup to more than 30 diseases. And we were been very successful.
What impact has this lawsuit on Roundup Ready had on their credibility, do you think?
Well, it depends on how much you're paying attention and who's the one that is involved with the credibility. Countries all over the world reacted to the International Agency on Research on Cancer, which is the WHO top body on determining whether something is a carcinogen. And they determined that glyphosate, the chief poison in Roundup, was in fact a class 2A
Right.
carcinogen. And so there was a pushback by Monsanto trying to discredit the WHO, trying to get it defunded by the US. They had their lapdogs in the EPA. That became public from the Roundup trials. The Roundup trials revealed in black and white how Monsanto tries to discredit everyone that says GMOs are unsafe. They came up with documents about me that they used in the trial. They came up with how they dismiss good science, ghostwrite their own science, attack scientists, put journal editors on their payroll, pay them lots of money, and get them to retract
Right.
other people. I mean, it was so blatant. So those that are paying attention
Got to see how they operate.
right. For those that didn't pay attention, they at least heard about, I mean, the number of millions of times that on TV it said, if you've used Roundup and
Yeah, I
suffer from
know.
non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, call this number because you may get money. So I have to say, although those machines that develop those plaintiff lists, it seems a little bit, slimy, smarmy.
Right.
It was great because it educated people about the association,
I know.
and they ended up getting over
Yeah, it
125,000
was the best.
plaintiffs.
It was the best advertising we could have asked for from our
I
side.
know, it was incredible. And then, so there are certain uh, farm, garden centers and hardware stores that have banned it. It's been banned in so many communities now. So if you have a community that's still using Roundup, go to rounduprisks.com and figure out how you can, sometimes with a single phone call and a follow-up email linking to our site, your own city council or parks and recreation or county government or school can stop using Roundup like that as soon as they realize the evidence. And so that's happening around the country. So they were very impactful, the combination of the WHO and the lawsuits. But the lawsuits made it gave it a second wind,
Right.
and it was very powerful. And of course, Bayer, which bought Monsanto, is reeling under the financial burden, and I think their chairman stepped down. Their CEO's been under attack. It's been a problem for
It's
Bayer.
brought down not only Monsanto but Bayer, their parent company, right?
Yeah, because they bought them just before the Roundup trial.
Okay, so I want to go back to one thing you said earlier. You said about 50% of the world, I believe, knows about the dangers of GMO now.
Yeah, a big survey just was done last year where 48% of the world's population in the survey areas, and there were, I don't know, 15,000 people surveyed, believe that GMOs could create health problems in the long run. 51% of US citizens in a different study acknowledged and believed that GMOs could create health problems. So that's more than we need in order to drive GMOs out of the food supply, because no one's going to use a GMO as a formulator for a product if they can use a non-GMO, put non-GMO on their product next to a GMO and make more sales, because GMOs don't provide any consumer benefits. So all these food companies are in the process of eliminating GMOs to
And
maintain market.
I'll let everybody know that's listening, that was your goal.
Yeah.
Institute responsible for technology, it was the goal to use the consumer, to the power of the consumer to end this. Now, back to the 50%, when 50% of the countries know about this, does that mean 50% of the countries have banned GMO?
No, this is just a consumer thing.
Okay.
The number of countries that ban it is way small.
Okay.
There's hardly any growing of GMOs in the European Union. There's just a handful of countries that grow a lot of GMOs, but the influence of the ag biotech industry on governments is legendary.
Yes.
I mean, I just told you about Monsanto's,
Yeah.
former attorney being in charge of
Yeah.
FDA policy.
Revolving door.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about it in terms of the EPA, the USDA, USAID,
FDA.
WikiLeaks shows that the whole State Department was operating as a marketing arm, an enforcement wing for the biotech industry. You could read the cables, from the ambassador to France asking for Washington to draw up a retaliation list of countries that are rejecting GMOs and to create policies that would, quote, cause some pain. I mean, it goes on and on, where the US would pay for politicians or media people to come to the US to learn about GMOs, either reporting or lawmaking, and they would send them to Monsanto for the training. So it was, they're locked by the hip. They're marching by the hip, and it's been an absolute shameful thing in every single administration, both Republican and Democrat, since right after Reagan.
Oh yeah, there hasn't been any difference at all, has there?
Well,
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, that's a whole other topic that we can get.
We weren't even supposed to talk about that. That was a bonus.
No, I'm really glad we did. We are going to have other speakers talking about corporatism. So let's get back to the real big problem, and that's the gene editing. And
Yes.
if you want to switch to that now, that would be great.
So with the normal GMOs, you take a gene from one species and you force it into the DNA of other species, typically with a gene gun, literally shooting it into a plate of cells, or with infection by bacteria. Now, with gene editing, you have a scissors that cuts the gene, but you have to figure out where along the gene it's going to cut. So you have the cutter and you have the citer, the one that cites, that finds the site. Okay, cut here, cut here. So they claim that it's just as they did when they introduced GMOs 25 years
It's
ago.
perfect. No, no,
They
totally.
said, "Oh yeah, it's predictable, it's safe,
Right.
it's natural, it just does what nature would do, only it does it better and faster."
Yeah.
These, for those that understand the technology, these are lies.
Right.
But there's the liars and the lied to. Most people are the lied to. A lot of the people you see in elected officials, they hear it in a very specific way, an echo chamber where several scientists representing the biotech industry get certain talking points and they all say the same thing. And so the elected official or the regulator believes it's true. Now, there is overwhelming evidence now that gene editing causes significant problems at the point of cut, at other points where it's not supposed to cut. It can be hundreds of mutations, thousands. It can be rearrangements. They tried to use gene editing on human embryos. It was described in a paper as chromosomal mayhem. So we're talking about a technology which is not ready for prime time. But the biotech industry saw what happened to GMOs and how successful we were in stopping them. So their number one goal was to convince the public and regulators that the new technologies shouldn't even be called GMOs and that they shouldn't suffer the same fate. They shouldn't be regulated the same. They shouldn't be labeled. They should just be called breeding practices so that the companies could just introduce whatever the heck they wanted. And many governments have gone along with this. And so far, there's a battle in the US as to whether that's going to happen between the USDA and the FDA and consumers and whatever. But so many countries turn a blind eye to gene editing, even though, and we can go into this if we had time, how specifically non predictable it is and how dangerous it is. Now, here's the issue that's that creates this unprecedented threat. We know that when you change an organism, you can introduce it into the environment and it can be there forever. Now we realize with gene editing, you're creating potential changes that you'll never be able to find in the assessment. Sometimes the gene code changes after the second or third generation, so there's no way you can properly assess it before you release it. And the changes that occur can be significant and could damage ecosystems. And now
And even
here's
if
the
it's long-term testing, it wouldn't matter because you don't know when those changes are going to occur,
it's
correct?
better to have long term. It's better to show genetic stability, but just not just long term in one dimension. When
Right.
you release something into the environment, it interacts with the entire ecosystem,
Right.
especially microbes. They're everywhere. They're the foundation.
Right.
We'll talk about microbes in a moment.
Okay.
So you have the fact that it's permanent change in the gene pool, and the most common result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. Now, the third piece in this trilogy is that gene editing has made genetic engineering so cheap and accessible. You can buy a do it yourself kit on Amazon for $169. Companies like Monsanto have robots, huge numbers of robots driven by artificial intelligence. Think about how many GMOs could be created when you have virtually anyone in the world having the ability to be a genetic engineer with the price going down and the power going up. Plus, it's so cheap and virtually every biological laboratory can do it. They're like playing with the gene pool, targeting virtually everything with DNA. How can we make this better? How can we make this better? How can we make this better? Now, what makes it even worse, Clyde, is that when the people doing the genetic engineering with gene editing have computer programs, algorithms that tell them what the risks are and where the off target mutations will be. And they'll do their gene editing and they'll assume that it works and they'll assume that they've been successful. And if the trait is functioning, they can deploy it, they can commercialize it. They don't actually evaluate the genome, the RNA, the proteins, the metabolites. And so they may be creating things that are very different than what's intended. But almost no gene editor actually does the evaluations to see if their creation meets what they expected it to do, they're going along with the myth. They believe, the proponents, that it's safe and predictable. And so, and then that's starting to erode among some, but so many people believe it's safe and predictable, they'll be willing to introduce a food into the American diet without ever testing to see if their intended change was successful. They'll look
Well,
at the trait. So they'll look at the trait like a
right.
mushroom, where if you cut the mushroom, it won't turn brown. That's a gene edited product that, because of the US regulatory system, does not have to be looked at by the FDA, the EPA, or the USDA. In other words, no one in the government has to know. They were sent a note to the USDA and said, you don't have to look at this. And the USDA said, nope, it's not in our area because it's gene edited. It's not required for us to have any regulation, no oversight. So the mushroom was created through gene editing that used a knockout strategy, meaning it was designed to knock out a gene. And they just assumed that when they used it, it worked because it doesn't turn brown when you slice the mushroom. We can feed it to the American people. But a study that came out later, and by the way, I don't think it's on the market yet, but a study that came out later looked at over 100 different knockouts and found that 1/3 of them didn't actually work. And for those, many of them produced truncated proteins. So it didn't knock out the gene completely, it just disabled part of it. Truncated proteins can be deadly, they can be toxic, they can be allergenic. And it is unlikely that the makers of this mushroom ever tested to see if the knockout actually worked, because everyone assumed up at that point that knockouts work perfectly. So there's this, if you go into the details, you realize that they're flying blind and they can impact the entire ecosystem. Now, I'm going to give one analogy about invasive species before. What I'd like to do is to jump into microbes, because
Okay.
especially we're on the pandemic. So I like this story because it is so clear and easy to understand. In 1859, 24 rabbits were released in the Australian countryside so that visitors would feel more at home and could hunt rabbits. Well, rabbits multiply like rabbits. And by the 1920s, the estimated number of rabbits in the continent of Australia was over 10 billion.
Oh my God.
They were not native. They did not have the,
Enemy.
there was the
Right.
natural predators
Yeah.
weren't there. And it cost over $600 million a year in agriculture to this day. Imagine if the genetic engineers in this generation not just add one new different organism, but replace the organisms, the microbiome, the insects, the mammals, the fish in an ecosystem, the algae, the fungus. So all of them act differently, permanently. What are our children's children going to do? They're going to curse us
Mm-hmm.
for the ridiculous lack of foresight.
Mm-hmm.
Not just introducing a single invasive species, but
Multiple.
eliminating the products of the billions of years of evolution, replacing nature with the products of laboratory creations whose number one most common result is surprise side effects,
Right.
and never even doing basic research to see what the impact is, let alone even having the ability to do the kind of research, because we don't have even the ability.
It's
So
this takes the breath away.
this is a existential threat
Mm-hmm.
of replacing nature in this generation, now that it is so cheap and it is permanent and it is prone to side effects. Now, any questions before we jump into the microbes?
Well, let's jump into the microbes, and then at some point here soon, let's get into what we can do about all this, because this is really, it's astonishing.
Yeah, well, you know what we can do about it is, that's why I'm here. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna like doom and gloom, goodbye. No, that's not how we work.
Yeah, I know, but geez, how do you stop this? It's even worse than the GMO plague.
Well, it is a GMO.
Yeah.
It is a GMO, but it is a cheap biological time bomb.
They're making it ubiquitous that anybody, like you said, anybody can go on, on
Yeah,
Amazon and buy.
and those, the ones that you can do when you're doing yourself kit may be innocuous, but the power is going to go up. You spend $2,000. Now you have a lab where you can do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
The price of that's going to go down. You might have vending machines. Who knows?
Okay.
So with
Micro.
microbes, the pandemic highlights how viruses and microorganisms can spread around the world easily. We've known that from Spanish flu. We've known that all over the place. And what we're discovering now is that the microbiome, this tiny world, these kingdoms, are essential to health. We have 10 times the number of cells of bacteria in the microbiome in our bodies than we have cells in our body.
Right.
And they're part of our digestive system, our detoxification system. They're part of our immune system. And it's the same way on Earth, in soil, in forests. And what happens is if you introduce a change in the microbiome or in viruses, they can swap genetic information. They might outsurvive the natural version, and the impacts can be stunning. Now, I don't have to emphasize, because of the pandemic, the possibility of viruses, but just to make the point clear, the H5N1 virus is estimated to have 24 times the death rate than the SARS-CoV-2 for COVID-19. 24 times. The highest estimated was 60%. I've seen 52%, but it kills a huge percentage of people that are known to have it. But it very rarely infects humans. You have to be around the animals for a long time. So genetic engineers in 2 different labs actually made airborne versions of it.
Why?
Insanity. Now, if you think about it, there's been over 100 documented releases of dangerous microbes from highly secure laboratories.
Does this go to what they were talking about, weaponizing, that they weren't supposed to be doing this weaponizing?
It's called gain of function, and you can call it weaponizing, but it wasn't necessarily being designed to create a bioweapon. It was being designed perhaps for research purposes and how to prevent and how to monitor to see if that particular disease was transforming in a certain way in nature. So they have a justification for it.
Right.
But the risk is so great.
Right.
I mean, there was a live smallpox that was supposed to be only held in 2 places on Earth. It was found in a cardboard box in some laboratory somewhere. It is not a perfect system. And another H5N1 was accidentally shipped. I mean, we have a situation where the lockdown is so weak, there's no justification for genetically engineering potentially pandemic pathogens to be more dangerous. So that's one piece, but it doesn't stop there. In the 1990s, there was bacteria that was engineered, and it was engineered to convert plant matter into alcohol. And the well-meaning scientists, and I have to point out, well-meaning scientists working in their field created bacteria that passed all of the required safety tests dictated by the Environmental Protection Agency and was going to be released. And it was ultimately going to be passed out to all these different farmers. Instead of burning your crop stubble, put it into large buckets and barrels, add the bacteria, wait 2 weeks, open the spigot. Now you have alcohol to run your tractors. You can sell it off farm and take the nutrient-rich sludge on the bottom and spread it on your fields because that's fertilizer.
Right.
So 2 weeks before they were going to release it outdoors to see how far it spread, a graduate student who was doing research on this particular genetically engineered bacteria walked into his laboratory and found where he had spread that nutrient-rich sludge, all of his wheat plants had turned to slime. He realized that the genetically engineered bacteria was still active and it converted the roots into alcohol. And then so he realized if this had been spread into the fields, it could have resulted in sterile fields. Now, how far would it have spread? Could you just incinerate?
You have no idea, right?
We have the example of the pandemic, how far these things spread. But we have another example. Elaine Ingham, who was that graduate student's advisor, was told by the EPA, a whistleblower, that they had done a secret experiment, which they still deny to have ever to this day to have done, where they genetically engineered bacteria, released it in Louisiana, and found that it traveled 11 miles in the first year, 11 miles again in the second year. It kept traveling, it kept traveling. They stopped funding it, but the EPA employee on her own dime continued to monitor, and eventually they found it all around the world.
Wow.
Now, imagine if this particular alcohol producing bacteria,
It destroyed the roots of everything, right? All over the world.
if it had spread,
Right.
if it had out survived its own natural counterpart, which is found on the root system of every plant ever tested, if it replaced that natural version, according to Lane Ingham, it could end terrestrial plant life.
Wow.
A cataclysm.
Right.
One strain of bacteria. Another one, almost released a few years earlier, could have altered weather patterns because it's naturally causes a condensation and raindrops and snow, and they made a version of it that didn't do that. So one single strain could wreak havoc and potentially create a cataclysm. Now they want to genetically engineer microbiomes, improve your soil bacteria, change your gut bacteria. Oh, they'll stay in place. The thing you put in the soil, it'll never get into your gut, and vice versa. They are completely blinded in reductionist thinking.
Hmm.
So, just so we understand the microbes as a special class. If you genetically engineer a human, as a scientist from China, with help from American scientists did, they created twin girls. They may give birth to other kids in 20 years, who may give birth to other kids in 20 years, and eventually you may have a group of them. If you genetically engineer bacteria, they multiply, but they also swap genes between bacteria. So they may end up passing genes on to all sorts of different types of bacteria or different types of microbes. So now and then they can mutate, just like the COVID-19 supposed to have mutated and now it's become the dominant strain in the
Well,
UK.
most of the flus mutate every year, right?
Right. So you release it and it can become worldwide, and it could be, not just trillions, but way, way more.
Right.
And because the microbiome is foundational for ecosystem and human health, we're talking about playing with fire. So we may have more ethical concerns about engineering the humans in China that happened, but from a health and environmental perspective, microbes are greater danger.
Wow.
So this is something that we have to realize. And because they're microbes, they're simpler in the genome, they're the easiest to edit. They're the ones that the do-it-yourself kit does. They're the ones that someone could do with a $2,000 lab and then create new microorganisms. It would be much harder for them to create crops in these cheap labs. But microbes, open for business.
So the bottom line is the thing that's most dangerous is going to be the most ubiquitous and the easiest for people to get a hold of. And
Right. So
what can we do? What can we?
that's the next question. So I've been very successful in my activism for a quarter of a century. We were successful in educating people about the health dangers of GMOs so that their decisions in supermarkets drove changes in the supply chain.
Right.
And that's still happening. But your purchase in the supermarket will not stop the introduction of genetically engineered bacteria or grasses or insects or whatever. So we need a different approach. Now, having basically founded a movement focused on the health dangers of GMOs and watched it grow, and I put in the miles, as you say, 45 countries and 2 books and 4 movies, and
Right.
trained 1,500 speakers and helped organize over 10,000 activists. We know how to build a movement over time. In this case, we're in a much bigger rush. We decided to take a leading role to create a new global movement. And we call the movement Protect Nature Now. You can go to protectnaturenow.com. You can see a trailer to a film and soon the film itself, short film. which highlights the dangers of GMO microbes.
ProtectNatureNow.com.
Yep. And what we want to do is sound the global alarm. And our focus is on microbes and viruses because we now have the pandemic already sounded the alarm on the dangers of this small unseen world. We can say that H5N1, 24 times more lethal, was genetically engineered to be airborne. Oh, we need to stop that. An obvious lesson to learn from the pandemic. But while we're at it, another lesson is let's not just look at potential pandemic pathogens. Let's look at potential catastrophes. In fact, let's just lock down the release of GMO microbes. Let's not take it from the laboratory into the environment.
Right.
And so we have a legal strategy, an education strategy, a global strategy. So if you go to protectnaturenow.com, I want to ask people to do two things.
Okay.
One, sign up so that you can understand what actions we want people to take. There'll be opportunities for you to reach out to your elected officials, to sign petitions, to alert media in your area, etc., to work on local initiatives in your area. Sign up, that is critical.
Okay.
Number two, we are building a global movement that does not have the luxury. I started with GMOs in 1996. We don't have 25 years to become successful. By then, nature may have been replaced.
Right.
So we need to have a lot of people. So I'm looking for organizations involved with climate change, oceans, environmental preservation, animal rights, human health issues, bird watching, gardeners, basically everyone who loves and lives in nature to add this as a plank to their platform. So we have an instant global movement of millions of people and thousands of organizations and support from governments and support from elected officials and support from celebrities and leading thought leaders, etc. Now, in order to mount that global plan, we need money. So I'm going to ask people to make a donation on a recurring basis of whatever you can afford. $5, $500, $5,000.
Can they do that at the website?
Yes, at protectnaturenow.com. And the reason why is the reason I want it in a repeated way is that if we know that it is coming, then we can hire the outreach director. We can open an office in this country. We can commit to a certain amount to create a film. We can do a lobbying effort. We can hire that expert. And so we'll know that it's there. But there's another thing, Clyde, that there's such an incredible benefit of participating at this level right now. This is a new technology, and it could influence negatively every living being, the whole ecosystem, and all future generations. No technology in history, perhaps maybe nuclear, if we had a nuclear winter, but other than that, no technology in human history had the ability to have such widespread damage. This gets self-propagated generation after generation. So
Right.
this means that humans have an opportunity to do more good than we had in the past, to protect all living beings and all future generations. Think about the change in the relationship of humanity with nature. Now that we realize we could do so much damage, we have to realize we've come to that inevitable time in human history where the streams of evolution are easily redirected with very little money and very little effort. We as humanity need to say, not on our watch, not in this generation. So this is a beautiful opportunity for people to widen their influence, widen their stewardship, open their heart. And one way to do that is to be a regular donor, participating in the global movement that's doing this. Not everyone can spend their time full time like me. Some people can spend no time, but maybe some of the time that people spend in their other pursuits, a portion of that, the money earned in those other pursuits, can go towards this.
Right.
And this is something that is an opportunity, perhaps a requirement of this generation to step up, because with a new technology comes a new responsibility.
So I have a couple thoughts. One, as you know, we've talked about this. Our country is very divided right now, politically. Um, this is a cause that transcends any division of human beings. And you mentioned people that are involved in nature. Well, we all live in nature.
Yep,
Every single
exactly. That was a
person.
setup. It's like it's
Yeah,
like it's like it only affects everyone who eats.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Or breathes.
Yeah, well, breathing too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so anyone who breathes or eats is impacted by this. Uh, it's just it's something that we all have to get together on. We have to be together. This is a cause that we need to get out there. Anybody listening now, please go to protectnaturenow.com, sign up, number one, and then donate, and please spread this. I know a lot of people are out there emailing their friends about political stuff. Why don't you take a day or two off and and use your mailing lists and all your means of your social media and everything, and Telegram or whatever you're on, and and tell your friends about this. And I know in my own family we have division right now politically, and I'm going to talk about this. That's my next topic of conversation, is this, and we'll see where that goes. But I think that this should be a cause that would bring us all together, and
And I
it's
want to
more
make I want to
important
make
than
it.
anything else.
Thank you,
Uh-huh.
Clyde. I really appreciate your support on this. I think you get it.
Yeah, I
And
get.
I think the fact that it bridges the gap is going to be working in our favor to introduce legislation at every level. Um, and I want to make it easier for people, even in the talking about it. Yes, people can talk about it. Everything that I've said now, you can repeat if you whatever you can remember. But the reason why we were so successful in the GMO movement we just did, the health and the food, is we created packets of knowledge that people could pass on.
Right.
So, Seeds of Deception, the world's best-selling book on GMOs, it was a book of stories that
Right.
created outrage and while it taught people about GMOs. Films, Secret Ingredients, show that when people switch to organic food, they get better from all these different diseases. Autistic kids no longer on the
Yeah,
spectrum.
amazing.
It's amazing. So that was like something you could pass on. So that's one reason why I'm so excited that people go to protectnaturenow.com and sign up, because we've got a 2 minute and 21-second trailer. We're going to have like a 14-minute film done. We have another 3-minute film. We'll have tweets. We'll have posts. We'll have action steps. We'll have things that you can share with the click of a button,
Mhm.
so that you don't have to spend any time other than a few minutes total to be a click and send activist. And for those that want to spend more, those that want to become part of the activist solution, we'll have training programs where you can learn how to work on your local level or state level, where you can learn to speak about this with PowerPoint presentation, scripted and trained. We have to create a new one. I did this for
Right.
my earlier
I
incarnation with
remember.
1,500
Mhm.
people. So all of these things, this is how we spend your money, by
Right.
making it easier for you to become a effective participant, changing the way people think about it. And I just want to point out about government and politics here, because this is really critical to understand when you're talking about a big picture like this, where we cannot let one rogue nation or one rogue transnational or one, fully well-funded scientist get away with this. Yes, we have to lock it down legally, but that's not where it ends. I was flown to Poland by the Polish government one year and gave a press conference with their Minister of Environment praising their excellent legislation and laws on GMOs. A week later, the government was replaced by a pro GMO government. I lobbied and gave information to a government in Thailand, and they decided to not allow any GMOs in their outdoor trials. 10 days later, a new
They were-
government was put in and they allowed GMOs in the trials. So we know that politics is not a stable solution. It's not that we should not do, and lawmaking, it's not that we should not go there, but we have to get the education system, the curriculum, popular culture, thought leaders. Everyone has to know that this is a new time in human civilization and our relationship with nature has changed with this new technology so that we all get that sense of protecting nature now. Everyone knows about the big ones, climate change, nuclear, but if think about it, some people were shocked and outraged that there was a human that was genetically engineered. How many people were shocked and outraged at the genetic engineering of bacteria?
Yeah.
No one. It's not an ethical issue. But when you realize it's like the rabbits being released outdoors that could end terrestrial plant life, change the weather patterns, cause pandemics, then you realize, whoa, we can't trust companies like Monsanto that we know rig research in their way and lie about things. And we
Right.
can't even trust the government, which is often manipulated by Monsanto and others. And we can't even trust the well-meaning scientists who may not have tested. The scientists who are going to release that bacteria were never going to, they did not ask that graduate student to do the research. The graduate student asked them because
Right.
he wanted something to get his PhD on.
Yeah.
He happened to find out that it created sterile soil 2 weeks before they were going to release it.
It came that close.
Yeah.
So
That's-
if they go to your website, do you have other instructional materials and videos now? Are you making those? Okay, you
right
do.
now,
Okay.
right now, we
So,
do, and
so
we're also gaining more and more. It's like, we're very few people right now, and we have a very large budget that we want to create, that we want to collect for, because we have an entire organizational chart in multi continents with plans, but we have only a handful of people now. But one of the advantages of this, Clyde, is that and this is why it gives me tremendous confidence. It is so easy to convey the risk. Everyone listening who's gotten to this point in the interview is like that Memorex commercial with the wind. It's like, oh my God, I get it. At climate change conferences, I asked audiences, what do you think is greater danger for planetary survival, GMOs or climate change? GMOs was higher than climate change.
that's because it is.
It is. And so I was surprised by that. There is a deep understanding and immediate recognition of the problem, which works to our advantage like nothing else.
Right.
If I say to you these things, we may replace nature in this generation with accident prone, corrupting gene edited organisms that persist in the environment and can alter the way our ecosystems functions without the ability to recall it. That's one sentence.
Right.
That one sentence
That's
is
it.
sufficient for most people to go, what?
Yeah.
And so that's that is what we need to get out there. And then people go, okay, tell me more. Tell me more. What do I do? How do I help? We need to fill in all those things.
Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I would implore everyone listening to this today to go to the website protectnaturenow.com, give as much as you can financially, learn as much as you can, try to get involved, get those, you'll have PowerPoints if you want to get out there so you can speak on this. Jeffrey will have the tools that you need to be a speaker and use a PowerPoint, make it real easy for you, and speak to any organization you can. This is something, like I said, all of us, every single one of us breathes and breathes and wants to be able to live, and we have to be able to take care of this problem. This is a challenge that could destroy our planet.
Yeah. I like it. If you breathe, eat, or love.
Breathe, eat, or love, right?
Care about anything else? Yes. Cool.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I really, really appreciate it. Let's do this again sometime, but we'll get this out there, and hopefully we'll have a huge summit and a huge audience that will be helping you and joining you in this movement to save our planet.
Thank you, Clyde. It was a pleasure to be here. And safe eating, everyone. It's one thing you could do right away. Eat organic. You'll notice the difference, and
Absolutely.
and then participate. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Jeffrey. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.